Stand in the Sinai, sand to the horizon. No tents, no fire pits, no broken pottery. The Bible says 2 million people walked here for 40 years. In a museum in Cairo sits a black slab of granite. It carries the oldest mention of Israel anywhere on earth, and it calls them a people already living in Canaan. It says nothing about Egypt. The desert keeps no record of the exodus the Bible describes. Almost everyone knows the story, even if they have never opened the book. The Israelites are slaves in Egypt, building the cities of a cruel pharaoh. A baby named Moses is set adrift on the Nile, raised in the palace, then called by God at a burning bush. He demands freedom for his people. Pharaoh refuses, and 10 plagues fall on Egypt, ending with the death of every firstborn. The Israelites flee. Pharaoh's army chases them to the sea, and the waters part, then crash down on the soldiers. The people wander 40 years in the desert, receive the law at Mount Sinai, and finally march into the Promised Land where Joshua brings down the walls of Jericho. It is one of the most powerful stories ever told. It gave the world its language of slavery and freedom. And for a long time, people assumed it was also history. The question this episode asks is simple. When archaeologists go looking for it, what do they actually find? Start with the size of it. The Book of Numbers counts the Israelites carefully. It gives 600,000 men of fighting age. Add women, children, and the elderly, and you reach a total of around 2 million people. 2 million is not a tribe. It is a nation on the move. It would have outnumbered the entire population of many ancient kingdoms and dwarfed Egypt's own standing army. A column of that many people with their flocks would stretch for hundreds of kilometers. They would need millions of liters of water a day in a desert that barely supports a few thousand nomads. If 2 million people lived in the Sinai for 40 years, they would have left a mark: graves, broken pots, the ash of countless fires, camps, and the debris of 4 decades of daily life. So archaeologists went to look for it. And this is where the famous story runs into a famous problem. The desert is empty. For more than a century, the Sinai has been surveyed and dug. Archaeologists know how to find ancient nomads. Even small mobile groups leave traces: hearths, flint tools, scatters of pottery, the low rings of tent camps. The Sinai does preserve such traces from many periods. Surveys have walked the peninsula for decades, mapping its ancient camps age by age. But for the late Bronze Age, the time a 13th century exodus is usually placed, the wilderness sites are silent. No camps of millions, no mass graves, nothing on the scale the story requires. The Bible even names where they stayed longest: Kadesh Barnea, where the people are said to have camped for 38 years. The site has been identified and excavated. For that period, it shows nothing. Now, absence of evidence is not always proof. A small group can pass through a desert and leave almost nothing, but 2 million people for 40 years is not a small group. An event that large does not vanish without a trace, and the trace is not there. There is a second silence, and it is louder. Egypt was one of the most bureaucratic states in the ancient world. Scribes recorded harvests, taxes, work crews, slaves, military campaigns, the movements of foreign peoples. We have piles of these records. Not one of them mentions the Exodus. No record of 10 plagues wrecking the country. No note of an army drowned in the sea. No mention of the sudden loss of a massive slave population, which for Egypt would have been an economic catastrophe. Egyptians did write about Semitic peoples living and working in their land. They are all over the records, but there is no Egyptian text describing their mass escape. Defenders point out that Egypt rarely recorded its own defeats, and that is true. But the scale here is the problem again. A disaster that emptied the country of 2 million workers and drowned a pharaoh's army is not the kind of thing that simply goes unwritten everywhere by everyone. If Egypt is silent about the Exodus, it is not silent about Israel. In 1896,
The archaeologist Flinders Petrie was digging in a ruined temple at Thebes when he found a tall slab of black granite. It is now called the Merneptah Stele, named for the pharaoh who raised it, around 1208 BCE.
Most of it boasts about a military campaign, but near the end, in a list of defeated enemies in Canaan, comes a single line: Israel is laid waste, his seed is not. This is the oldest mention of the name Israel found anywhere. And look at where it puts them. Not in Egypt. Not escaping through a desert. The Egyptians mark Israel as a people already living in the land of Canaan more than 3,000 years ago. In the hieroglyphs, they even tagged the word Israel with the sign for a people, not the sign for a city or a country. To them, Israel was already a recognizable people living in the land. The very first time Israel appears in the historical record, they are already home. The story says they were just arriving. The stone says they were already there. Then there is the conquest. After the desert, the Bible describes a lightning campaign. Joshua leads Israel into Canaan and destroys its cities. The most famous is Jericho, whose walls fall flat at the blast of trumpets. Jericho is a real place, and it has been dug carefully, most famously by the archaeologist Kathleen Kenyon in the 1950s. She studied its walls and its layers in detail. Her conclusion was a problem. Jericho's great walls were destroyed centuries before Joshua could have arrived, around 1550 BCE. At the time of the supposed conquest, Jericho was small, or empty, or already in ruins. The same pattern shows up at other conquest cities. Some were not even occupied then. A conservative minority still argues for a different date, and the debate is real. But the mainstream picture is clear. The walls of Jericho had already fallen, on their own, long before the trumpets in the story could have sounded. So if the Israelites did not march in from Egypt, where did they come from? The answer is sitting in the highlands of Canaan. Around 1200 BCE, archaeologists find something remarkable. Across the hill country, a wave of new villages appears, hundreds of them, where there had been almost nothing. The population of the highlands roughly doubles in a few generations. Before this, surveys count only a couple dozen small settlements up here. Within a few generations, there are well over 200. A whole society appears, almost from nothing. These are the first Israelites, and the striking thing is how Canaanite they look. Their pottery, their house design, the famous four-room house, their tools, all grow out of local Canaanite culture. There is no sign of newcomers from Egypt. There is one quiet exception in these villages. Almost no one eats pork. The pig bones that fill nearby sites are simply missing here, a people defining itself partly by what it would not eat. The mainstream picture, though not the only one, is this. Israel did not come from outside Canaan. Israel emerged from inside it. At this point, it would be easy to swing too far the other way, to say the whole thing is fiction and walk off. But honest history resists the easy ending in both directions. Because tucked inside this very Israelite tradition are details that are hard to explain if nothing happened in Egypt at all. Details a people inventing a glorious origin would have had no reason to make up. A nation writing its founding myth tends to claim noble local roots. It does not usually claim that its founders were named by its enemies, and yet that is exactly what we find. The clue is in the names. Look closely at the leaders of the Exodus, and something stands out. Their names are Egyptian. Moses is the clearest case. In Hebrew, the Bible invents a meaning for it, drawn from the verb to draw out, but the name itself is plainly Egyptian. It is the same element in the names of pharaohs. Thutmose, Amose, Ramesses. It simply means born or son of. And Moses is not alone. Several figures in the priestly tribe of Levi carry Egyptian names. Hophni, Phinehas, which comes from an Egyptian word for the southerner. These Egyptian names cluster in the Levites and almost nowhere else in Israel. Think about how strange that is. Of all Israel's tribes, the one tribe of priests, the keepers of the tradition, carries Egyptian names for its founders. That is not what you invent. That is what you remember. It points to a real connection with Egypt, hiding inside a story that has otherwise lost its footing in the desert. So here's the version many scholars now find most convincing. It does not need 2 million people or a drowned army or walls falling at a trumpet. We know for a fact that Semitic peoples lived in Egypt for centuries. One Egyptian papyrus lists the household servants of a single estate, and nearly half of them carry Semitic names. Semites in Egypt are not in doubt. It is the escape of millions that is. We also know that one Semitic group, the Hyksos, actually ruled part of Egypt and was violently expelled around 1550 BCE. A real expulsion of a Western Semitic people from the Nile Delta. Out of memories like these, a smaller story could have formed. Perhaps a single group, possibly the Levites with their Egyptian names, genuinely left Egypt, carrying a god they called Yahweh. When they joined the villages rising in the highlands of Canaan, they brought their story with them, and over centuries, the experience of a few became the founding epic of an entire people. There are serious objections, and no scholar can prove it, but it fits the evidence far better than 2 million people vanishing into a silent desert. None of this makes the Exodus worthless, just the opposite. A story does not have to be a documentary to be one of the most important things a culture ever produced. The Exodus gave the world a template that has never stopped being used. The idea that slavery is not destiny, that an enslaved people can walk out toward freedom, that power can be defied. That story has been read by the enslaved, by the oppressed, by movements for freedom across centuries, who saw themselves in a people leaving Egypt. Its power was never in the head count, it was in the meaning. So this is not a story about catching the Bible in a lie. It is about the difference between two kinds of truth. There is the question of what physically happened in the 13th century BCE, and there is the question of what a story does and carries and means. The archaeology answers the first. It cannot touch the second. So stand in the Sinai one more time. The sand is still empty. There were almost certainly not 2 million people here, and the walls of Jericho fell long before Joshua. On that, the ground and the records agree. But woven into the story are Egyptian names that no proud nation would invent, the memory of Semites who really did leave Egypt, and a people who really did rise, not from outside Canaan, but from within it. The Exodus as a mass event leaves no trace. The Exodus as the founding story of a people outlived every empire that kept better records than they did. The desert forgot them. The story refused to. And maybe that is the most remarkable thing of all. Not that 2 million people crossed a sea, but that a handful of people with a story conquered 3,000 years.